I was the child that you just saw in that home video, I never questioned whether I would be housed or fed. Of course I would. Well, I am filming in Alexa house. A portrait of Alexa Cannon is right behind me with her smiling face. Alexa house hosts families who are not at all confident that they'll always be housed and fed. They're in the Family Promise program, which works with them to gain housing stability. Our congregation supports this ministry because everybody needs a place that they can call home. I want you to consider, though, that maybe God is homeless and intends to be. From the opening words in Genesis in the beginning to the final amen in Revelation, God's homelessness is a major theme of the Bible. Israel's God, the Christian church's God, refuses to be domesticated and settle in one place. That was not the case in Egypt. The pharaohs considered themselves gods, and they wanted to build huge houses for themselves, whether it was the palaces that they were living in or the pyramids where they would live forever. Well, let's put aside for a moment that you can visit the mummified remains of pharaohs in various museums around the world. Look at what the pyramid represents. That thing is built to last forever. And not only is this triangular marvel meant to last, so also is the system it represents, with all the goods and services flowing from the slaves at the base up to the peak, who is the Pharaoh God himself. Also supported is the system that causes that to happen. How different from the God of Moses and the slaves. Out in the wilderness, where is God's home? Well, God's in the burning bush, right? Well, fire is a funny thing. It changes things, it consumes things, it purifies things, it's there, but it's also not there. Same with the cloud that goes out before the slaves in the wilderness. Rain can fall from the cloud to quench the thirst of the land and the beasts that roam upon it. But a cloud is there, but it's not there. But look, there's the tent or the tabernacle carried by the wanderers on the long journey through the promised land. Is God there? Priests go inside the tent to worship God after all. But the tent itself is portable, which means that God cannot be found in one place. God can be worshiped there, but God cannot be domesticated no matter how pretty the wood and curtains. Moses has to climb a mountain to have a conversation with God. I hope you get the symbolism here. Fire, cloud, tent. They speak to a God who is present with us, but lives nowhere. Let's now jump generations to when Hebrews are now settled in the nation of Israel. Wells have been dug, houses have been built, walls have been erected, and now they are a nation called Israel. The Jews have a homeland, and they have built a house for God. I speak of the temple, of course. King Solomon built a temple in the middle of the capital city, near the king's palace and at the top of a hill. And there's some Pharaoh-style thinking behind this temple. It's magnificent. And at the base, there are stones so large that archaeologists today wonder how they were cut, moved, and stacked. Now, to read some Bible passages, you think that God does settle down within the walls of what is now called the house of the Lord. Psalms are written that speak to the temple being the habitation of the Most High. A whole class of clergy maintained its liturgies, and a system of animal sacrifices is instituted not only to please God, but to fund the maintenance and programs of this house of God. Keep in mind, though, that passages have to be read in context. The Hebrew scriptures came together after the first temple was destroyed. And by the way, the Christian scriptures came together. Some of it was written before the second temple was destroyed, but they came together after the second temple was destroyed. So when you read the Hebrew scriptures for the overall story they tell, you see that while God can be worshiped in the temple, God cannot be confined there. You find passages, especially from those pesky prophets, that point out that first, the God of Israel is not the God just of one people, but is the God of all the peoples of the world. And second, that if worship does not manifest itself in justice and compassion, Its sacrifices and liturgies mean nothing to God. With what shall I come before the Lord? Asked the prophet Micah for the people of Israel. He floats the ideas of offerings and sacrifices, but then answers his own question by saying that what God really wants from us is to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God. Because Israel fails in offering the sacrifices required of justice and compassion, even the majestic temple cannot spare Israel from what finally happens. Israel falls to Babylon, the temple is destroyed, and many of the people of Israel become homeless. They are exiled to the regions of Babylon and then eventually beyond into all the nations. And the exiles fear that God is no longer with them. There's one psalm of lament that says that they weep when they remember what it was like to have God have a home with them back in Jerusalem. But gradually, they begin to see the good news of God's homelessness. They find that even in exile, they have a home with God. They hear this from the scriptures of exile which come together, and they hear this news that God is with them, but they also hear that God finds a home with all the peoples of the world, all the peoples who value justice and mercy too. And so the exiles build more houses for study and worship called synagogues. God was not thought to dwell there really, but like fire and cloud, God who is not there is there when God is worshiped and studied and experienced, but never is God domesticated. Within the synagogues, the Torah was studied for how it could help the people live with an ethic, how people could serve justice and mercy in their everyday lives. The exiles, who needed God's hospitality and protection in exile, gave thought to how they could offer hospitality to strangers and sojourners in their midst. I'm going to jump now to the New Testament, but not with as much detail. I am going to choose one gospel, the Gospel of Luke, and ask you to notice 4 things. First, notice where Jesus is born. Not in Mary's home, not even in Mary and Joseph's hometown. He is born away from home in Bethlehem, and not even in a house, but in a cave or a stable. Second, notice the story, the only story we have in the Gospels of Jesus as a child. Where is he? Playing at home? No. He's in the temple, explaining the meaning of the Torah to priests in ways that amaze them. Third, notice where Jesus is found in the stories of his life and ministry. Not in his home. He is a wanderer, a man in exile who never stays put. He's in houses as a dinner guest, out in the countryside, at a well, in a garden, visiting the temple, and finally as a captive in the lavish homes of Herod and Pilate, where he has shown no hospitality at all. Finally, look at where Jesus is after he has died. He's placed in somebody else's tomb, homeless even in death. But he doesn't even stay in that tomb. The tomb is found empty. The resurrected Jesus appears to the disciples where they are hiding and tells them that they are to be, in some spiritual way, homeless themselves. They are to go out into the world, go out into Judea and Samaria and into all the world, because that's where God wanders. I took this quick, sweeping look at the Bible to suggest that if you are looking for God, don't look for a specific place. We are most at home with God when we are, when we keep the commandments, preaches Moses, or act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly, says Micah. Live according to the Torah, teach the rabbis. Or love God with all one's heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love one's neighbor as oneself, says Jesus. So, why do we provide places for people who are or could be homeless? Why do we provide Alexa House? Why do we support the Rescue Mission and Ram House's Day Shelter program? Why are we building a house for Habitat for Humanity? Well, we help others find a place to call home because we find our home with God.